Hey guys, I'm Chris Buck and a very warm welcome to Friday Fretworks. And this week, vintage guitars. Are they really worth the hype? That probably won't surprise you to learn that every time I use or feature a vintage guitar of any particular note or prominence on my YouTube channel, as much as I get a lot of comments from those appreciative who enjoy seeing or hearing such guitars being put to use, I do get a lot of pushback as well from those who find it all a little bit tiresome, and honestly, I do totally get it. Vintage guitars have been done to death in recent years, especially on YouTube, and as much as I always try to approach it from the perspective of not getting too caught up in the notion or prestige of playing an iconic instrument or trying not to fetishize these guitars too much, do understand that the prices attached to them, especially in recent times, can be a little bit gross, even more so at a time when there's a bloody cost of living crisis for so many. As I said though, I always try to approach the subject from the perspective of someone who can not only play a little bit and try and get something out of these guitars, but as someone who, for the foreseeable at the very least, is in no way, shape or form in a position to be able to afford any of these instruments, and as such, isn't going to be swayed by the inevitable confirmation bias of trying to convince myself that, having just spent 5 or 6 figures on this thing, that it is now the thing to end all things. Thanks to the YouTube, I've been incredibly fortunate to play a glut of very cool, very old instruments. Mid-50s Strats, Blackguard Tellys, any number of early 60s Fenders or mid to late 50s Gibsons, 15 or 16 bursts, I think, at the last count. Guitars that if you encountered them in everyday life, you probably wouldn't be able to touch.
Don't point even.
Don't even point?
No, it can't be played. Never. I mean,
Can I look at it?
No.
So what
No.
is the crack? Why are they so expensive? Do you really need one? Are they that much better than modern day guitars? I guess in short, vintage guitars. Are they worth the hype? So first and foremost, what is vintage? Now, prior to making this video, I did a little bit of digging online, and unsurprisingly, given it is the internet, not just in the world of guitars, but the world of old things in general, nobody can quite seem to agree on the definition. Some say anything older than 20 years, some say anything older than 40 years. Now, antique seems a little bit more definitively placed than 100 years old or above, but in regard to vintage, it definitely seems a little bit more fluid, inevitably being used at the dealer's discretion whenever they think using the word will probably help sell something that little bit more quickly. Now, in regard to vintage guitars, when we use that phrase, I think we can all agree that we're referring to stuff from the 1950s, 1960s, and early 1970s as a push. Golden era. And why do we call it the golden era? Well, it is for the most part the era from which these guitars were born. Pretty much every guitar design that we know and love appeared in the space of 8 years. 8 frenzied years of design and innovation that was to define the sound and the aesthetic of popular music for the next 7 to 8 decades. The Telecaster in 1950, the Les Paul in 1952, of course the Stratocaster in 1954, and in 1958 alone, the Explorer, the Flying V, the ES335, and the Fender Jazzmaster. And if we push that time frame only a further 2 years to the end of 1960, you have the first Gibson SGs emerging. The musical innovation of the 1950s was and still is unprecedented, and as such, guitars from this period in time are a tactile, tangible connection to one of the most musically and culturally rich periods in history since the Renaissance, which is absolutely crucial to understand when trying to analyse their inherent value. When you buy an early 50s Tele or a 62 Strat or a 59 Burst even, its qualities as a guitar are very much secondary to its historical and cultural and musical significance, in much the same way as if you bought a 61 Ferrari 250 GT short wheelbase, its qualities as a mode of transport very much play second fiddle to its place atop the pantheon of classic guitars. You're holding, or driving, a piece of history, and of course, you're going to have to pay for Interestingly, one thing that will forever set vintage guitars apart from other highly collectible sought-after items, art, jewellery, Ming Dynasty porcelain, whatever it is that it has a purpose other than to simply look pretty. It's functional, you can play it, you can make music on it, it will actually produce a sound. And as such, whereas the price of other highly collectible sought-after vintage goods will fluctuate massively depending on any number of factors, principally their relevancy to any new generation, vintage guitars have steadily risen in value over the last 40 or 50 years, making them a pretty sound investment, if that's your kind of thing. So what of their functionality? Are they good to play? Are they better or worse than modern day guitars? Now, the first thing I would say about vintage guitars is that much like modern guitars, they are guitars. They're unique, each one different. They're made from a natural, variable material, assembled by natural, variable people. And as such, each one is unique. Some are good, some are less good. Now, of course, one thing it is particularly important to take into account is that production methods of today are somewhat different to production methods of the 1950s and 1960s. Today, of course, much more being automated or operated by CNC machines, and as such, there will be a greater degree of discrepancy with guitars made 50, 60, 70 years ago. Body shapes, neck carves, top carves, etc., etc. But ultimately, guitars, hopefully, will always be handmade, at least to some degree, and as such, they will always vary from instrument to instrument, however subtly. What is interesting, however, is our propensity, shall we say, to overlook certain idiosyncrasies when it comes to vintage guitars, purely for the fact that we are playing a piece of history. Skinny or worn frets, crackly pots, variable fretboard radius, or simply sporadic tuning ability, stuff that we would be very quick to dismiss as inherent flaws in modern day guitars, we're quite happy to write off or kind of overlook as quirks or part of its charm or vibe when it comes to vintage instruments, something I know I've been guilty of myself. My 1956 Fender Duosonic is one of the coolest guitars I own, but is a total bugger to play, primarily because of its smaller size, something Fender remedied on the later reissues. But if I was given a choice between playing the later reissue and the original, which do you think I'd choose? I mean, there's nearly 70 years, I still find that mind-blowing, nearly 70 years of character and personality in that 56. Much like my 62 Strat, it's covered in house emulsion and has a literal hole drilled through the body, but look at it, it's one of the coolest guitars that I own, and therein lies the paradox. If you're a guitar lover, it is near enough impossible to disengage that romantic notion of the fact that you are playing a piece of history and simply judge it as a guitar. To go back to the classic car analogy for a second, it's a little bit of a running joke at this point that literally every time I've seen a Ferrari Dino outside of a museum, one of my favourite car designs ever, it's been parked on the side of a road with a quizzical looking owner trying to figure out from where the steam or the smoke is coming from. But if I had the money to afford one, would I buy one? Absolutely, in a heartbeat. Stupid, isn't it? So what's the bottom line? Vintage guitars, are they worth the hype? Now, of course, that's a question that only you can answer, and that answer, of course, being very much dictated by what you look for in a guitar. Ultimately, they are just guitars, albeit ones with a few extra miles on the clock. But if that extra mileage and all of its inherent vibe, character and patina and enigma and mystery is something that you feel here being an incredibly important word, as I've no doubt that a massive part of this is psychosomatic, is something that you feel will make you play differently, or dare I say better, then vintage guitars are probably for you. When it comes to patina and character, they can be unparalleled, and I know, speaking personally, that has kind of drawn something different, dare I say better, out of my playing in certain scenarios, whether that's real or entirely imagined. At that point, kind of becomes irrelevant. Conversely, if you like modern guitars that are flawless to play and don't have any of the idiosyncrasies of the construction methods of a bygone era, then vintage guitars probably aren't for you, which is fine. We're all different. Guitars are all different, and thankfully there's no shortage of them these days, so we don't all have to learn to play on a Rossetti Lucky 7 with a neck like a battle axe. As ever, I'm Chris Buck, you're watching Friday Fretworks. Please subscribe, hit the bell icon if you haven't already, and I shall see you next week for a decidedly more 21st century episode. Cheers guys, take care, see you soon.